What Spirit's collapse actually costs.
This podcast is AI generated. The hosts are fictional personas, and the episode is adapted from curated research articles and source material. Spirit Airlines didn't run out of customers, it ran out of fuel buffer. And that sentence is going to look mild compared to what comes next. Welcome back. I'm Avery Quinn.
I'm Miles Arden. This episode, we're tracing a single thread from an airline bankruptcy through the energy conflict that caused it, the infrastructure data race it's accelerating, the clean energy capital flight it triggered, the AI trust gaps it exposes in defense contracting, and the quantum readiness gap it makes suddenly urgent.
The theme is fragile infrastructure, and the first bill is always smaller than the final one.
Spirit Airlines filed for bankruptcy and ceased operations. Most coverage framed it as a low-cost carrier, with a fragile model finally running out of road. That's true, as far as it goes. But it leaves out the triggering event that made the difference between a manageable squeeze and a terminal one.
Jet fuel prices roughly doubled following the U.S. escalation with Iran. That escalation is not background context, it is the story.
Fuel already represented the largest single operating expense for any airline. Spirit's model depended on razor-thin per-seat margins and high aircraft utilization. That works when fuel trades in a predictable range. It does not work when the market prices in a sustained supply shock because the U.S. has signaled willingness to escalate with a major oil producer.
The doubling didn't come from an actual supply shortage. It came because the market started pricing political risk premium into every barrel. That's a different kind of move. A shortage can recover when tensions de-escalate. A risk premium, once embedded in the forward curve, tends to persist until the structural condition that created it changes.
And the U.S.-Iran relationship is not changing in a direction that reduces tension.
Larger airlines have hedge books, complex financial instruments that lock in fuel prices months or years forward. Spirit, competing on price in a tight margin environment, carried less hedging coverage than its larger peers. That was rational when fuel was cheap and stable. It became catastrophic when the spot price moved.
This is the mechanism that matters. The carriers that fail are not necessarily the worst-run ones. They're the ones with the least buffer between their cost structure and their revenue model. The fuel cost increase didn't kill Spirit because Spirit was uniquely badly managed. It killed Spirit because Spirit's margin for error was already exhausted by normal competitive pressure, and this shock arrived without warning at the worst possible point in the cycle.
Aviation fuel is not an isolated input. It is embedded in supply chains that run through shipping, logistics, chemical manufacturing, and agriculture. When jet fuel prices move significantly, the effect propagates through the broader economy with a lag of several quarters, first hitting airlines directly, then freight costs, then input prices for goods that depend on air transport for time-sensitive components.
The question the financial markets are now wrestling with is not whether other carriers are next. It is which sectors have the most concentrated exposure to fuel cost as a percentage of total operating expenses, and how much of that exposure is hedged.
Federal fuel hedging programs exist to prevent this kind of cascading failure during supply shocks, but those programs are calibrated for supply disruptions, weather events, refinery outages, not for sustained geopolitical risk premium. A weather-related spike reverses when the weather clears. A geopolitical premium embedded by an ongoing proxy conflict does not clear without a change in the underlying political condition.
The current programs were not designed for a scenario where the U.S. is actively escalating with a major oil producer while simultaneously maintaining strategic ambiguity about end state. That mismatch between program design and actual scenario is what allowed Spirit's fuel cost exposure to go from manageable to terminal in a single price cycle.
Spirit is not an outlier. It is a precursor. The question is not whether more failures follow. It is how quickly the recognition spreads that this is a systemic fuel cost event, not an airline-specific one, and how much damage gets done before that recognition arrives.
Now let's look at where that same geopolitical pressure is showing up in places that don't look like oil shocks at all.
Uber has a plan for the autonomous future, and it doesn't involve replacing drivers, not yet, anyway. The company is recruiting its existing driver network to serve as a distributed sensor array for autonomous vehicle companies. The core idea: Uber's human-driven fleet becomes the data collection backbone that AV developers Waymo, Aurora, Torque cannot afford to ignore.
Robotaxi regulation remains a patchwork of local approvals, insurance frameworks, and political caution. Meanwhile, the companies that need training data most are running out of efficient ways to get it. Real-world driving data from diverse conditions, weather, road types, traffic patterns, edge cases, is the constraint that separates a functioning AV from a demo. Uber has millions of drivers logging billions of miles in exactly those conditions.
That's not a rideshare business. That's an infrastructure business with a different label.
The standard read of this move is that Uber is diversifying its revenue sources while robotaxis remain in limited deployment. That's too charitable. Uber didn't build this infrastructure by accident. The company has been quietly accumulating the positioning to become the dominant data and logistics layer for autonomous mobility, a role that doesn't require Uber to win the AV hardware race, only to remain indispensable to whoever does.
If the model works, Uber converts driver supply into a two-sided value proposition. Drivers get income today, and Uber gets leverage tomorrow. AV companies that rely on Uber's sensor network for training data become dependent on Uber's distribution relationship. The company that couldn't build self-driving cars becomes the company no self-driving car company can ignore.
What Uber is building is a data layer for physical world AI, a category that has received far less attention than the model layer, but may be equally consequential. The companies that own physical world data at scale may exercise more structural power over AI development than the companies that build the models themselves. Training data is the constraint. Infrastructure is leverage.
The robotaxi debate has focused on when the technology will be ready. Uber's move suggests the more important question is who will own the roads when it is.
The Iran conflict is showing up in capital markets too, just not where most people are looking.
The FT reported this week that investors are piling into clean energy assets as the Iran conflict reshapes the calculus around energy security. The move is being read in some quarters as a tactical bet on oil price volatility. It is that, but it is also something more consequential. A signal that the market has decided the Iran escalation is not a contained event, but a permanent repricing of Middle East risk.
This matters because the clean energy build-out has always depended on a certain geopolitical stability assumption, specifically that fossil fuel supply disruptions would be temporary, and that long-duration clean power would be a hedge against that volatility, not a primary beneficiary of it. The Iran conflict is breaking that assumption in real time.
If investors now price Persian Gulf transit risk as permanently elevated, the economics of solar, geothermal, and nuclear shift accordingly. The connection to Spirant's collapse is direct. The smart money is doing exactly the opposite of what airlines could do. They're not just reacting to higher fuel costs, they're repositioning around the assumption that the fuel cost problem has structural permanence.
The second-order implication is about green hydrogen and ammonia. Several Middle Eastern sovereign funds have been quietly building out clean hydrogen capacity as an export commodity. A sustained Iran conflict premium on energy shipping routes changes the calculus on whether that investment pays back and whether it attracts more sovereign capital.
What remains uncertain is whether this is a durable rotation or a short cover rally. Clean energy assets have experienced several false start cycles driven by geopolitical premiums that subsequently resolved. The difference this time is the timeline. The US has signaled sustained pressure on Iran, and the intelligence community's framing suggests this is a multi-year posture, not a spike and fade episode.
If that framing holds, the clean energy capital rotation has further to run. If diplomacy reasserts and the Gulf risk premium collapses, these positions become expensive hedges with no payoff.
Now let's talk about what the defense establishment's AI trust gap reveals about the gap between safety rhetoric and operational reality.
The Pentagon has awarded classified AI contracts to OpenAI, Google, and Nvidia, and did not award them to Anthropic. That sentence is facts. Everything else currently circulating is interpretation. Some of it plausible, most of it incomplete.
The Defense Department's selection signals that the government is currently willing to work with vendors it regards as having sufficient infrastructure, maturity, operational track record, and security posture for sensitive national security workloads. Anthropic, whose Claude models are widely regarded as among the most capable, and whose safety pedigree is a core part of its market identity, is not on that list.
Anthropic was founded by former OpenAI researchers who left in part over disagreements about safety priorities. The company's founding thesis is that building safe AI systems is a precondition for building powerful ones, not an afterthought. That position creates an interesting tension when the customer is the U.S. government and the work is classified.
Government classified work requires vendors to clear significant security hurdles, maintain facility security clearances, and demonstrate a track record of handling sensitive data responsibly. But the Anthropic exclusion appears to go beyond clearance logistics. Multiple sources close to the matter suggest the defense establishment has a specific concern: uncertainty about whether Anthropic's safety commitments would create operational constraints that conflict with classified deployment requirements.
The U.S. national security apparatus moves fast, operates with deliberate opacity, and has mandates that don't always map cleanly onto AI safety frameworks designed in Silicon Valley. Anthropic's constitutional AI approach, which includes built-in constraints on what the model will and won't do, may be viewed inside the Pentagon as a limitation rather than a feature in certain classified contexts.
The most striking element of this story may be OpenAI's presence on the list. OpenAI's name has been synonymous with AI safety controversy since its founding, and yet here OpenAI is, inside the classified AI pipeline. The most plausible reading is that OpenAI made a deliberate strategic choice to pursue government partnerships as a core growth vector, and that the operational maturity and security infrastructure the company has built has reached a level that the defense bureaucracy finds acceptable.
Being outside the defense AI pipeline is not a fatal judgment. Anthropic has a different commercial focus: enterprise AI, AI safety research, frontier model development that doesn't require classified contract work to be viable. But it does reveal something important. The defense establishment is building a tiered structure for AI partnership that privileges companies willing to operate within government security and operational frameworks, even if those frameworks don't fully map onto the company's stated safety philosophies.
The gap between what AI companies say about safety and what the government requires in practice just became visible in a new way. Anthropic's exclusion is not the end of that story. It may be the beginning of a more honest conversation about what AI safety actually means when it meets the state's operational needs.
Speaking of operational needs, Washington has decided quantum risk is real enough to operationalize. Now comes the hard part.
3 federal quantum initiatives advanced this week. Individually, they would each merit a paragraph in a policy newsletter. Together, they reveal something more significant. Washington has crossed a line from treating quantum risk as theoretical to treating it as operational.
The House Science Committee advanced H.R. 8462, the National Quantum Initiative Reauthorization Act, by voice vote on April 24th after adopting 12 amendments. The same week brought movement on H.R. 3259, the Quantum Computing Cybersecurity Preparedness Act, which would require federal agencies to inventory their cryptographic systems and develop migration plans for post-quantum algorithms. And late last year, but only now receiving wider attention, the Department of Defense issued internal guidance requiring all DoD components to coordinate post-quantum cryptography through a centralized PQC directorate with hard deadlines and specific prohibitions.
These three initiatives are different gears in the same machine. The NQI reauthorization provides the strategic framework and funding. H.R. 3259 creates operational requirements for civilian agencies. The Pentagon memo shows what detailed implementation looks like when rubber meets road.
One amendment, offered by Representative Fauci, directs federal agencies to assist state and local governments with PQC migration planning. This addresses a gap that enterprise and government security leaders have worried about for years. Federal agencies have resources and expertise to handle cryptographic migration. Your average city IT department does not yet. Those systems handle traffic controls, water treatment facilities, and other critical infrastructure whose encryption will eventually be breakable by quantum computers.
Creating federal support mechanisms for local PQC migration acknowledges this vulnerability explicitly. It's an admission that the attack surface extends well beyond federal networks.
The DoD memorandum establishes specific deadlines. Components must replace pre-shared key solutions and symmetric key distribution protocols by the 31st of December 2030. The memo also prohibits testing or procurement of quantum key distribution systems for confidentiality purposes, a direct shot at QKD vendors who have marketed their technology as the ultimate quantum-safe solution.
The DoD's position is straightforward. NIST-approved post-quantum algorithms are available now, and waiting for theoretical perfection from QKD is not acceptable when current encryption faces an existential threat timeline.
What H.R. 3259 emphasizes, requiring agencies to catalog cryptographic dependencies, is the unglamorous work that determines whether migration actually happens. You cannot protect what you do not know you have. For organizations that have accumulated decades of technical debt, this inventory process often reveals larger problems than initially suspected.
The December 2030 deadline for replacing vulnerable cryptographic methods in DoD is aggressive. For an organization as vast as the Defense Department, with systems ranging from desktop computers to nuclear command and control, 4 years to complete migration is a stretch. Deadline extensions are likely, but setting an ambitious target creates urgency. Setting a comfortable one creates slack.
The more fundamental risk is execution capacity. These policies create extensive new requirements: cryptographic inventories, migration plans, security assessments, coordination mechanisms. But the quantum-literate security workforce needed to execute all of this is not being trained fast enough to meet demand.
What these three developments show, taken together, is a federal government moving from quantum awareness to quantum action. The machinery exists, the deadlines exist, the coordination structures exist. What remains unproven is whether the institutions can execute before the threat timeline accelerates, and whether the commercial sector, which faces no mandate but equally critical exposure, will move with comparable urgency.
If you are waiting for final federal guidance before starting PQC migration planning, you are already behind.
Let's bring this back to where we started.
The bill for the Iran conflict is being paid right now by an airline. The next bills are already being tallied in clean energy portfolios, in classified AI contracts, in quantum legislation that doesn't have an execution plan yet.
Geopolitical conflicts don't stay in the headlines. They work their way into supply chains, capital flows, contractor lists, and quantum legislation. The companies and institutions that survive the next decade will be the ones treating infrastructure resilience as a strategic asset, not a cost center.
Spirit didn't fail in spite of good management decisions. It failed because the macro condition shifted faster than any individual business can adapt. The fuel cost shock that killed Spirit is the same geopolitical condition that is repositioning clean energy capital, reshaping the AI defense contracting landscape, and accelerating quantum readiness legislation.
These stories look like separate topics. They're not. They're 5 separate pressure points on the same structural weakness.
This is what infrastructure fragility sounds like when it becomes visible. The first bill is always smaller than the final one.
I'm Avery Quinn.
I'm Miles Arden. We'll see you next week.
This podcast is AI generated. The hosts are fictional personas, and the episode is adapted from curated research articles and source material.